everybody, let's go to start this last conference. Oh, some data. Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't see.
It's okay. I already have sent you the membership request in the Facebook page.
Yes. Okay, I will go there. I will do this, and then I am too old woman and I cannot do now, but I will do after 2 things. I cannot do 2 things. Okay. I will do this on that, okay? Let's go to start this moment, this conference that in our program we have the name of Knowledge in Praxis, the social construction of the body. Conhecimento em praxis, praxis do Freire, de social, ou construção social do corpo. I am so spontaneous, but I decided to write because it's not easy for me to talk this morning, and you understand why I am reading for you, okay? And sorry because I will read, but I need to be clear at this moment. And from the Brazilian people and the Portuguese people, not just Brazilian, I have prepared in Portuguese what I am talk in the beginning in Portuguese. The translation is not so good, but it's a way to be more close with you. Para o pessoal brasileiro, e não só português, da língua portuguesa, eu preparei o que eu vou falar aqui, eu escrevi, eu traduzi no Google, não está muito bom, mas pelo menos dá para acompanhar mais de perto também o que eu vou falar, para que vocês possam... Ih, eu não consigo passar tudo. Ok, então eu vou pedir, deixa eu ver o que eu consegui aqui. Eu consegui só um pouquinho, sorry, I have a technical problem. I will pass this to... Dulce? No, to Hegler? Can I send it for you?
Okay.
Can you... Perdão, pode falar teu e-mail? Aí você vai passando por partes, porque não dá para passar tudo, tá bom?
Meu nome é Hegler.
Hegler?
@hotmail.com.
Nossa, que difícil. Mas também não há outro, né?
É um nome bem singular. A primeira vez que eu falei, você disse que eu falava igual sua mãe, Hegler. Agora eu não sei nem mais fazer.
Mas eu aprendi rápido, eu não costumo, eu sou meio retardada. Bom, obrigada, Hegler. Pode ir passando assim por parágrafo, eu acho, tá bom? Thank you for everybody to understand this moment.
O arquivo é um PowerPoint, é?
Não, não é não, querido. É pra você pôr aqui no chat. É o que eu vou falar em português, só que eu vou falar em inglês, tá bem?
Eu posso copiar o texto todinho e pôr no chat?
Pode, mas não dá para fazer tudo. O chat é limitado, tem que ser parágrafo por parágrafo, por isso que eu te passei. Tá bem? Ok, sorry again. Today is our last day. And first of all, I would like to say, as I told in the chat, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, just to remind us that we are around the world and respect the time of each other. And it's very interesting to be connecting in different space-time. And this moment was thought by us as a moment of dialogue between professors Ubiratã D'Ambrosio, knowing by Ubi D'Ambrosio and Saul Restivo. However, at the beginning of this year, after we designed this event as a board members of RC54 at ISA, the professor Ubiratã D'Ambrosio passed away, and it was a strong shock to us, especially for Restivo and I that have worked with him for a long time, learning, sharing, and improving our struggle for dignity for any lives, for the solidarity engaged in the libertarian struggles, and for the decolonization of our knowledge and acts, starting by ourselves as triple individual and as a small community. Still in mourning, digesting the transcendence of Ubi, and feeling myself still fragile to prepare a discourse about Ubi, I share here brief words of Ubi, wrote by Anthony Shannon one directors of Taylor and Francis editors, with some emphasis for myself. Ubiratã D'Ambrosio was a professor emeritus of mathematics at State University of Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. He was born in Brazil on 8 December 32 and died in 12 May 21. He was widely known and respected as mathematics educator and historian of mathematics. It was in ethnomathematics that his contributions were pioneering, initially in the culture of colonization and later in culture more generally, particular in terms of international peace. His pioneer work in ethnomathematics alone is especially worth of notes, because many of its features can shed light on some current controversies in mathematical curriculum's development in various countries, reinforcing his enormous contribution to an equity, formal education, and for all, as well as to improve the great importance of communitary education, including the generational one. The systemic complexity was one of area where he gave an enormous contribution, having his presence in the First World Congress of Transdisciplinarity at Convent of Arrábida, Portugal, in November of 1994, being one of main authors of the Charter of Transdisciplinarity, a product of this event and a food of humanization of spaces. There are worldwide theses and dissertation awaiting those prepared to delve deeply and apply a priority in their own cultural context, the fascinating insight which arises from Ube's life work, with special attention on the relational concept of body culture, as Clareto 2003 and Mesquita 2008. In fact, Ube loved the coffee break, the lunch time, and the moments of the questions that normally defied the scheduled times in the conference. The encounter with the other was his essence. The creative insubordination was part of his scientific legacy in the development of paths to contribute to the peace was always his primary focus. Wow, this is Ube. And thank you, Ubis, because you learned to me, or teach me, not learn, sorry, you teach me that the transcendent is it. You are in me, you are now in us now. And as you can realize, we have a speech of Sauer Estivo that prepared especially and with love his speech for this today. And unfortunately, he's an old man and he has a very serious problem of health in allergy. He lives in Brooklyn, in New York, but he always say that I am Italian and anarchist. And he prepared to us with careful and with love some videos that we share with you. And I will work in collaboration with Esther, that will do this. And before to start, antes de começar, Esther, I will present him in his words. Dr. Sauer Estivo is a retired sociologist and anthropologist. He has held professorship and endowment chairs in the US, Canada, Europe, and China. He was most recently professor of sociology, science studies, and information technology at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where I have studied, and information and senior fellow Center for Intercultural Communication and Interaction in University of Ghent, Belgium, and adjunct professor of technology, culture, and society in New York University. He is an honorary special lecturer professor, Research Center for Philosophy of Science and Technology, Northeastern University, Shenyang, China. He is the editor-in-chief of Oxford Science, Technology and Society, an encyclopedia, a founding member and former president of the Society for Social Study of Science, and most recently the author of Science, Sociology, and the End of Philosophy, How Society Shapes Gods, Brains, Math, and Logics. Other contribution and author about Einstein Brain, Genius, Culture, and Society Networks in 2020, and Society and Death of God in 2001. I have the honor to be one of her PhD students in socioanthropology of space, and to finish this amazing period with a publication titled A Life, a City, and a case study of history, culture, and ethnomathematics in São Paulo. I would like to ask Esther, his speech was shared in 6 videos as he prepared for you. Give a time to breathe among them. And he sent to me the speech writing, and I share with you here. And I think that I will share it by email, that the last email that Dulce sent for everybody, I will send there, it's easy. And if you want to try to read it while he is talking the same speech. After that, I will share the full paper about this, and one link that you can find the videos, the full paper, and his speech. Thank you very much for your attention for this video, and you have a time after that. Thank you. Esther, if you want to start, it's okay. Oh, Esther, se você quiser começar, desculpa. Thank you, Esther.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sal Restivo. I'd like to begin by thanking Mônica and Mesquita for inviting me to this forum. And I'd like to dedicate this talk to our dear beloved Professor Ubi D'Ambrosio, who left us recently, but leaves behind a worldwide spirit that will continue to guide our lives and our work. In this lecture, I want to draw your attention to the body in transition. From one postmodernist standpoint, we are now obliged to speak and think in terms of bodies, just as science studies has taught us to speak and think in terms of sciences, not science per se, not science in the grammar of the ever-present tense, not science as a once and for all time emergent. We are in a world already imagined by Hermann Lutz in the 19th century, when he advised us that there is no logic, only logics. In the 1920s, Oswald Spengler echoed this sentiment when he said, there is no mathematic, only mathematics. Now we can say there is no body, only bodies. But we have to begin with Nietzsche and his assertion that there is only body. This drove the final stake into the heart of the ancient Greek dream or nightmare of a fleshless mind. It's no accident that it was also Nietzsche who proclaimed the death of God. This left us with a soulless body. In 1949, Gilbert Ryle gave us a mindless body. The mind, he said, was just a body at work. So we now had a body without a soul and without a mind. It would require a powerful sociological imagination to add some substance to this body. This has led to important changes in how we think about bodies, brains, and consciousness. The emergence of the social sciences beginning in the 1840s led to the development of the concept of social construction. This is not a philosophical idea, as some intellectuals imagine, but rather the fundamental theorem of sociology. It says that humans have only one way to learn, discover, and invent. That is by interacting with each other in sociocultural and bioecological contexts on our planet and its extraterrestrial territories. There are no transcendental, no supernatural, no innate mechanisms which we can draw on for information and knowledge. Furthermore, evolutionary theory has shown us that humans arrive on the evolutionary stage already, always, and everywhere social. We don't arrive as individuals, we become social by way of some social contract mechanism. We arrive social and become individuated by culture. We are naturally, by way of introspective transparency and cultural programming, inclined to experience ourselves as free-willing agents. This is countered by the myth of individualism and the concept of the I as a grammatical illusion, an idea we owe to Nietzsche. And indeed, introspective transparency is an illusion. What can we say about the body in the pandemic in terms of the principles I've just laid out? COVID-19 has forced us to confront the profoundly social nature of the self, the body, and the brain. For the most part, students of the body from the second half of the 20th century on focused on the influences and contexts of technology, biology, and medicine. COVID-19 forced us to confront the social nature of the body and raise our awareness of the sociological imperative in body studies. The consequences of COVID-19 were reinforced by a political pandemic, POTUS 45, the presidency of Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, and the concomitant rise of nativist, nationalist, authoritarian, tribal, and to coin a term, tribalistic, and outright fascist politics across the globe, forced us to consider how threats to democracy were threats to the body as a center of freedom and liberation. Non-democratic governments must exercise great discipline over the body. In societal terms, this means that bodies will be raced, gendered, classed, and enslaved in extremis. The 17th century philosopher Blaise Pascal famously remarked that all of our problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room alone. This has been widely quoted and discussed, but rarely are we given insights into why this is so. Many studies have demonstrated that humans become uncomfortable when forced to sit in an empty room with only their own thoughts to dwell on. Social science offers an answer to this problem that social psychologist Steve Taylor has diagnosed as eumania. It follows from the fact that we are culturally victims of the myth and cult of the individual. We moderns experience ourselves as individual, isolated beings. Left to our own devices, we become locked in a spiral of increasing awareness of loneliness. Humans have been loosened from their deeply social natures. by cultural developments, especially in the industrial West and its geopolitical economic satellites. Loosening us from a revolutionary social nature produces what I've called dissociism. This is a spectrum of alienative conditions that blind us to our social nature and make it impossible for us to see the social and to see it as the causal foundation of all of our thoughts, all of our behaviors, all of our emotions. Contrast this with the reigning Neuralist assumption that our brains are the source of all of our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. This is reflected in the rationales for the various late 20th and early 21st century international brain initiatives, including Bush 1990 and Obama 2013. Under these conditions, the social problem of loneliness is exacerbated. COVID-19 has underlined and brought to light the nature and implications of neglecting our social nature. It has alerted those of us prepared to see its implications to the fallacy of the transparency of introspection. Our experience of ourselves as free-willing agents is as much an illusion as our experience that the earth does not move. Loneliness has been a concern for many observers of the human condition, especially in America, for some time now. Social isolation or rejection disrupts our thinking, our willpower, and our immune systems. It is for this reason solitary confinement should be considered cruel and unusual punishment. COVID-19 has forced us into various levels of state and self-imposed solitary confinement. Loneliness, lack of connections, may be the key to violent behaviors, ranging from bullying to street violence and school shootings, not to mention violence to the self, from cutting to suicide. It's not too much of a leap to suggest that it might play a role in terrorism and warfare. Not only should we not underestimate the relevance of the loss of community in explaining violence, we should also pay more attention to the relevance of touching in a radically social species. Fear of and barriers to touching, including various levels of sensual and sexual interactions, are implicated along with loneliness in many, if not most, of the problems of the human condition. Is it possible that a few more hugs could help us achieve world peace? Or at least cut down on bullying among children and adults? Loneliness is not just an individual phenomenon. The separation of groups and cultures may cause collective loneliness. Ecumenical thinkers like Karen Armstrong and her Charter for Compassion and the Dalai Lama have argued that world peace could be based on the compassion that is at the center of all religious traditions. The problem is that compassion is a centrifugal force, and it reinforces the boundaries that separate groups and cultures. This centrifugal force tends to overwhelm any centrifugal forces that might help to link us across our cultural differences. There are certainly cases in which the centrifugal forces of compassion can be mobilized to support communication and exchange across national borders and across barriers of sex, race, gender, class, and ethnicity. But the differences represented in all these categories of our lives are intensified by the centrifugal forces of compassion. And this breeds physical and emotional violence across these categories. The idea that getting disconnected from each other is dangerous is not new. It became visible as part of the collateral social damage of the Industrial Revolution. It is iconically represented in the distinction between Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft societies. That dichotomy was voiced in such English pairings as rural-urban, country-city, informal-formal, primary-secondary, status-contract, and community-society. There was a sense of loss, the loss of community, the loss of connection in these dichotomies, not a sense of progress. It is time we gave serious attention to the evolutionary sociology lesson that humans are the most radically social of the social species. There are no lone wolves. Even when alone or in isolation, the person is a social being. I've been discussing the body in its ultra-social context. Let's take a deeper dive into the significance of social bodies in social contexts. I'm going to move to the fuzzy frontiers of a theory of bodies in mutual presence. When humans come into contact with other humans, become present to each other. A field is generated that engages a process of rhythmic entrainment. This amounts to a variable synchronization of rhythmic systems. It's akin to what Durkheim called collective effervescence. Human bodies are rhythmic systems, essentially vibrating entities. Our postural vibrations are constantly adjusting to what comes under our gaze, whether an object like a painting, plants, animals, or other humans. Dance is the gross expression of the fine-grained rhythmicity that is innate to all levels of life, from cells to bodies. And even social systems have their rhythms. Even societies and groups dance. When we sociologists and anthropologists argue, contrary to the physicists and biologists, that consciousness originates in the social world, we are pointing to the innate rhythmicity of humans and their capacity for dance and the in-between conduits that generate consciousness. That is, the field generated by rhythmic entrainment, collective effervescence, carries emotional communication and is the fuel of consciousness.
While Esther changed the video, I just say that Vestivo sends the telephone, email, and many contacts that you can send questions and start and begin a dialogue with him. Okay. Thank you, Esther. he is not well and need to drink water and tea all the time.
É para colocar o vídeo? É, né? Você... Ah, tá. Não sabia
Não,
se
eu só ia falando
um
enquanto...
espaço. Ah, tá.
Turn now to the so-called hard problem of consciousness. This has been hard because the wrong scientists, using the wrong tools and concepts, have been looking in the wrong place, guided more by what they experience as the introspective transparency of their own minds, an illusion, than by science. Socialness is a fuel, and our social being must be constantly refueled. The amount of fuel in our self-tank is measured in units of cultural capital. The larger the tank, and the more cultural capital it holds at any given time, establishes the limits of sanity when alone or in isolation. The Pascal problem of being alone arises in part because of our innate, radically social nature, but also because, and to the extent, that we go into the room alone with a fuel tank almost empty of cultural capital. The more cultural capital in our tank, the easier it is to be alone, within limits. The practical consequences of this idea saved Bruno Bettelheim's life in a concentration camp. My efforts are grounded in a critique of the traditional understanding of science and ultimately of the Western subject as universal norms. The Western subject, already gendered to subordinate the female and the feminine, is brought into the world as a universal norm in the process of the West's imperialist expansions. This norm denies the subject's dependence on the other and produces the illusion of autonomy and freedom. In fact, this abstract and universal consciousness was always embodied male and European, whether indigenous or transplanted. Women and non-European men, even if they achieved the required education, could enter science only as surrogates, disciples, or by passing, that is, by adopting the language, gestures, postures, attitudes, and values of Euro-American men. At this point, we can rest our understanding that bodies, unlike body, participate in a broader, more exclusive, more inclusive world that turns away from Plato and God and embraces the other. You still have a body that stands alone phenomenologically, but this is now a body that manifests Walt Whitman's assertion, I am multitudes. There is no body, only bodies, embraces the bodies of the other and trans bodies. Against the backdrop of all that I've covered in so far, we are now prepared to consider a new way of thinking about the body in relation to the brain, consciousness, and creativity. The question I address in this section is, what can we learn about the brain, consciousness, and creativity by considering these ideas in terms of the concept of bodies as multitudes? I'm going to approach this by interrogating the very idea of genius. My study of the fate of Einstein's brain and the socially networked roots of his genius echoes Hélène Mialet's 2012 Anthropology of Stephen Hawking. Mialet identifies the human, material, and machine-based networks that were Stephen Hawking. Hawking, like Einstein, is widely portrayed as a bodiless, singular individual. Viewed through the lens of anthropology and sociology, Hawking is seen as incorporated, materialized, and instantiating a complex network of humans and machines. If individualism is a myth, if, as Nietzsche claimed, the I is a grammatical illusion, and the Einstein with confidence that doesn't erase the obvious uniqueness. Especially environmental diversity study, and plasticity research, social neuroscience, epigenetics, social science, and network theory, between 1950 and the 1990s, pose serious challenges to Einstein's uniqueness. That uniqueness classically is understood to be purely cognitive, Platonic in its distinction from his body. Uniquely ordered and logical, unlike his baggy sweaters and disheveled hair. The new paradigms of bodies and brains do not erase Einstein's uniqueness, but they do force us to rethink the nature of his uniqueness. With respect to his physics, for example, the idea of mass energy equivalence was not new. It was already in the conversations of physicists as early as the 1870s. Poincaré published papers on relativity theory in 1904 and 1905, Einstein's miracle year. Uniqueness is not a matter of genes, neurons, quantum phenomena, or the biological brain. Einstein's uniqueness is defined by the uniqueness of the social networks he encountered as his life unfolded. If his brain holds any clues to his creativity, those clues would be functions of how his social and cultural environments impacted the architecture of his brain. This idea is reflected in the social brain paradigm introduced into the neuroscience literature by Leslie Brothers in 1990. Einstein's dead brain could not be a narrative of innate genius. The story of his genius has to be a story of connections in the world at large. The lone wolf genius only lives in John Wayne's America. John Wayne, the American actor, was 6 feet tall with broad shoulders. He was the embodiment of the rugged individualism associated with America's Old West and frontier mentality. In movies such as The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Wade embodied the autonomous hero who affirms the myth of individualism, the hero who stands outside of society and its surface norms. Such heroes appear often enough to feed our need for violence, as well as to affirm our individualism. And then they disappear, to wander across America's spacious skies, leaving behind a trail of masculinity, patriotism, self-reliance, and responsibility in their wakes. Occasionally, we may get images of something more than a cowboy riding or walking off into the sunset. There may be a kiss, a look of longing, a farm, saved from disaster, villains dispatched, and a town's solidarity restored. Something that has the scent of community. But individualism returns again and again. John Wayne embodies America's myth of individualism, and even a kind of genius of masculine posture, pride, and stride. The myth of individualism is reflected in the lack of a politics of compassion in large segments of the American people and its political representatives. One doesn't usually associate Einstein with masculinity, but his affairs and his attraction for women speak to some kind of masculinity and something gendered about his genius. It seemed natural in John Wayne's America to imagine that the secret of Einstein's brain could be read from the architecture of his brain, the inner landscape of a unique individual outside of history, society, culture, and even time and space. And what a landscape we imagined it might be like. Awe-inspiring, of course, like the landscape of Monument Valley, Utah, in the opening scene of Wayne's movie The Searchers, pictured in the text of this talk.
Acho que agora é o 4, não é, Esther? Não foi esse já? É o 5.
So why does genius
É o 5.
enter this discourse? Isn't it possible that there is some sort of dialectical relationship between the I and social structures or networks, some slippage between man and society, as Alvin Goulna put it? Some social scientists do indeed take this path. For those who do, there is always a volatile potential for prioritizing psychology and biology over social science. There is always the danger that their introspective sense of self will override the science of the social. That's why I think it's wise to assume that it's social networks all the way down. All systems can be described in terms of the degree to which they are open or closed. Open systems have boundaries that can be penetrated by outside forces or stimuli. Most systems cannot interact with forces or stimuli outside their boundaries. No system can be completely closed, and open systems can be open to different degrees. This concept of systems allows us to distinguish between determined and lawful. All systems are variously determined. Closed systems are fully determined. Open systems, variously determined. All systems are lawful. So humans as open systems reflect lawfulness, but are not determined. As thermodynamic systems, we are bound by the laws of physics. As chemical systems, we are bound by the laws of chemistry. And as social systems, we are bound by the laws of society. But as open systems, our lives escape being determined. We do not have free will, but we can and should seek freedom from coercive human institutions. Remember Ragged Dick? Unless you're around my age and American, the name may not resonate. Ragged Dick Richard Hunter is the rags to riches literary invention of Horatio Alger Jr. whose work appeared toward the end of the 19th century. His work has become absorbed into the American mythos as the story of the self-made man. The curious thing about Alger's rags to riches boys is that their success depends in the end on the luck of finding wealthy businessmen, mentors, and patrons. Alger himself sponsored philanthropic efforts to help the Richard Hunters of the world. There were two female protagonists in Alger's writings, Ellen Ford and Tattered Tom. Tattered Tom dressed and lived like a boy, and like many Alger heroes, she was a newsboy. Girls are not prominent in Alger's writings because the possibility of finding a mentor or patron in the business world was not open to them. The Horatio Alger myth of individual success through will and initiative is not just a myth about America. It is a myth about the Alger stories themselves. If you read my biography psychologically, or what is essentially the same thing, from the perspective of the American mythos, it looks like the story of a strong-willed boy from the working poor streets of Brooklyn, New York, taking initiative and pulling himself up by his own bootstraps. To tell the story this way requires being blind to social forces and social contexts. This is a trained incapacity in the families, churches, and schools that educate us to think in terms of individual self-interest, mythical heroes and icons, and the rags to riches narrative. Remember that Americans learned about opportunity and social mobility as part of the story of American exceptionalism. In fact, social mobility rates in the US are not substantially different than they are in any modern industrial nation state. And they depend in any given era on political and economic factors that can raise or lower rates of social mobility. Incidentally, the phrase, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, comes from an 18th century fairy tale and was a metaphor for an impossible feat of strength. In concluding this talk, I want to discuss what the social brain paradigm can tell us about the body. My social brain model, which is pictured in the concluding pages of the paper on which this presentation is based. The model was designed to graphically represent and expand the anthropologist Clifford Geertz's argument for the synchronic emergence of brain and culture. In summary, one, biological, social, and cultural causal forces are reciprocally intertwined and conjointly causal. Two, human behavioral repertoires emerge from the complex, parallel and recursive interactions of cells, genes, neurons, neural nets, organs, biomes, the brain and central nervous system, other elements of the body systems and subsystems, and the social interactions in their ecological and Umwelt contexts. 3. Socialization is reimagined as a process that simultaneously informs and variously integrates the biological self, the neurological self, and the social self to construct personality and character. Each element in the model is a dialectical entity containing its own internal seeds of change and follows a temporal dynamic that may be at different times synchronous or dissynchronous relative to other elements. 5. Each element is conceived as an information system, with all systems multiply interlinked by the circulation of information. 6. The diagonals with double-headed arrows, which crisscross the model, map the chaotic dynamics and cooperative neural mass discussed by Skarda and Friedman. 7. The unit model is activated in a triad of unit models, and it is that triad that is the basic model of brain, mind, culture, world. This reflects the idea that the triad is the basic unit of social life. And 8, the diagram is a general connectome. A connectome maps the elements and interconnections in a network. The term has been used specifically in connection with mapping the neural connections of the brain. Connectomes may range in scale from maps of parts of the nervous system to a map of all of the neural interactions in the brain. Partial connectomes have been constructed of the retina and primary visual cortex of the mouse. In line with these developments, my model represents the highest level of the connectome, a connectome of connectomes. Researchers in neuroscience have been exploring the vagus nerve, which forms a complex network linking the brain and the internal organs. This network is being viewed as helping to shape our thoughts, memories, and feelings. This network is implied in my model. When considering the etiology of behaviors traditionally considered to be genetically grounded, it is now important to recognize that the brain, like humans, arrives on the evolutionary stage, always, already, and everywhere social. Therefore, what we have considered to be linearly transmitted genetic phenomena must now be viewed in the context of a brain that is at no stage of development separated from the social and cultural imperatives that form us as Homo sapiens. The very notions of genes and genetic must now be revised in the context of the social brain paradigm. The next stage in this project is to embed the basic triad of the general connectome in the nested networks of the social and cultural connectomes, locally, regionally, and globally, so that we now visualize a global connectome driven by the circulation of information across nested networks. A connectome comprehensively maps neural connections in the brain. More broadly, a connectome maps all the neural connections in an organism's nervous system. The term was introduced under the inspiration of the efforts to construct a genome. Connectomics is the science of assembling and analyzing connectome datasets. The development of comprehensive structural descriptions of the brain's networks was conceived in terms of a data set that was called the connectome. Such a connectome would help us understand the emergence of functional brain states from their structural substrata. Connectomics, the production and study of connectomes, can be applied at different scales, from the full set of neurons and synapses in a part or all of an organism's nervous system, to macro-level descriptions of the connections between all cortical and subcortical structures. The full connectome of the roundworm has been constructed, along with partial connectomes of the mouse retina and primary visual cortex. In conclusion, we now have bodies, not body. Bodies are nodes in information networks that link cells to molecules, genes, and neurons to genetic and neural networks, that system of networks to the networks of organs, biomes, the brain, and the skin, all linked to social networks and social ecologies. Welcome to the body as a connectome of connectomes in the network of a global connectome. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, Restivo. Thank you very much to let us to touch the history, to touch the one person that was the founding member of the Society for Social Studies of Science. Muito bom tocar na história e tocar na pessoa que foi um dos fundadores da Sociedade dos Estudos Sociais da Ciência. Ele foi mesmo um grande, e é, né? Não foi, ele é, um grande ponto da luta para trazer as ciências sociais no discurso do mainstream. No discurso principal, misturei línguas agora, né? Mas nesse discurso tão cerrado da ciência e abrir. Thank you very much, Sal, to be one important person in the struggle to bring the social study for the mainstream to the science. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody that has the patience to listen and to be here with us. I will send you his contact. He sent an email to me asking to send you his mail, his phone number and WhatsApp, and to share with you his page where you can find the videos, the transcription, and the full paper that he prepared as very ancient. He prepared full paper when he has a speech. You need to learn with him. A gente precisa aprender com essas pessoas, porque são anciãs, né, com nossa ancestralidade, que para ter uma fala, ele prepara um artigo para fundamentar muito bem a fala. Então tá lá também o artigo completo dele. We need to learn. Really, I need to learn. I don't know if we, but I need to learn. And I think that it's impossible to open a debate because he's not here. He tried to be here, but he's worst. He's not well with allergy, and he has lots of difficulty to speech. His voice is slow. And he told me that he is like an elephant he's tried to be outside a little bit because he can feel that he's started to transcend. But thank you very much for each one of you to be here in this session. Sorry about this different movement. It's not normal. And we prepare with our heart, Greg, Dulce, and I. And unfortunately, we cannot propose the dialogue because we really want to propose a dialogue between our ancestrality in social science and struggle for humanize this space and the importance of the body, the study of the body, the social study. But it was impossible, and then in face of the imprevisibility, we and Sarah Steve give to us this gift. Thank you for you to be here all together. It's a different sense to be together and to, I don't know, born in us this different representation just to see a move or see a video together. Thank you very much for you. And if you have some doubts or some questions or something, please contact him, because he said to me that he can write. He cannot talk, but he can write. Okay? Thank you very much.